move on, I want to tell you a quick story about what happened in Zaytun. It's not that quick. It was actually a nightmare for the people that lived there. And I'm sure the delegates who were also there met with some of these families. I met with two families. One of them was Ibrahim al-Samuni. And Ibrahim described a story that began late night when Israeli aerial bombing began on all of Zaytun, forcing everyone into their homes. In the morning, they found that the entire neighborhood was filled with Israeli ground troops. And a few soldiers came to his door, where he and 16 of his family members were, broke down the door with a sledgehammer, forcibly removed them, and shoved them into the adjacent home. And they stayed there for a few hours, unable to leave, no access to food or water, until soldiers came again and forcibly removed them and placed them in the home of Ibtisam al-Samuni, where they were gathered with the other Samuni residents from Zaytun. About 120 family members were pushed into this home, where they were kept under house arrest, circumscribed by soldiers so that they couldn't leave. Late into the night, they stayed up in anticipation of what would happen to them, having no idea. They weren't told anything. They weren't given warnings. They weren't told that we're looking for Hamas militants. You'll be here until we find them, and then we'll let you go. They were forced to stay there until further notice, and the further notice came at 7 a.m. when a missile fell onto the home. And the first missile might have been what they call routinely a house tap. And it's to identify that basically a precision missile, to make sure that the missile has the right coordinates, indicating that this was a deliberate attempt to destroy the home. And the residents in the home are usually given 5 minutes to escape after a house tap. But in this case, they were under house arrest, and immediately after that, when a second missile came, destroying the home over the civilians, killing 29 civilians. Among them were Ibrahim's wife, Layla, his eldest son, Muhammad, and one of his other sons, whose name evades me at the moment, or escapes me. One of the walls was destroyed of the home, and the injured who weren't debilitated could flee, and did flee through the home to escape Zaytun. And as they were fleeing, soldiers who were in the military outpost shot at them with live ammunition. And they shot Mu'tasim, Ibrahim's 10-month-old grandson, directly in the chest. I have the picture. I'm not showing it to you right now, but I will be happy to share it. The purpose of this exercise isn't to villainize the army, although they're not short of doing that for themselves. The purpose of this was to demonstrate that this was a deliberate attack on the civilians as well as the civilian infrastructure, which constitutes a violation of international law. We found that this story was also common throughout the South. This is a picture, or half the face, of Rohiya al-Najjar. Rohiya al-Najjar is a 47-year-old woman who is known as a matriarch to the community, to her neighbors, to her family. Her husband literally said to me, she was worth 1,000 men. And so if I had gone, it would have been better. I feel like this was a woman who represented inspiration for everyone else, and it's no surprise that she was the one who was killed. This is the last picture taken of her before she traveled to Mecca to perform pilgrimage or Hajj. Rohiya's story is very similar. In Khuza'a, in the south, aerial bombing began on the night of January 3rd, forcing all the residents into their home. That was about 11 p.m. At 2 a.m., Israeli tanks and bulldozers rolled in from the border, which is only 700 meters away. And as it rolled in, it destroyed every home in the way. And here you could see some of that destruction. Some of the residents tried to go onto the rooftop to wave white flags to indicate that they were civilians. It didn't matter. They were shot at as well. So everyone eventually gathered in front of the courtyard of Rohiya's home. So it was about, again, 110 women. This time, the men, fearing that they would be arbitrarily detained, had fled into the center of the city. So most of those that were gathered were women, children, and the elderly. Although that doesn't matter. That what qualifies you as a civilian in international law is you are not a combatant. You bear no arms and you're not fighting. This is Rohiya's husband and her son, Muhammad. This is her 14-year-old daughter, Hiba, who described the story to us. So after the woman had gathered in front of the courtyard, they stayed there for several hours until a soldier ordered them to march to the city center. Of course, they were afraid. They saw that there was no mercy on the homes or the people in the homes, and they wouldn't march. And Rohiya gave them strength. She gathered her scarves, white scarves she had just brought back from her pilgrimage in Mecca, passed them out to the women, convinced 15 of the women to join her to march to the city center, and told them to be brave. And as soon as she marched outside of the courtyard onto the main street, a sniper on the second floor in the home in front of her shot her in her left temple, killing her instantly. Her daughter, Hiba, tried to pull her mother back, but the other woman pulled her away because the live ammunition from Israeli soldiers continued to rain on them. And so fearing for her life as well, they left Rohiya's body as well as another woman, a 15-year-old woman who was shot in her leg, and fled back into the courtyard, where they stayed for another 4 hours. And then, again, they were ordered to flee. Not to flee, but to march to the city center. Again, they refused. And they only moved, they only marched, when a tank destroyed one of the walls of the courtyard within which they were hiding. At that point, they marched to the city center into a school where other residents were taking refuge, and once inside, that school was attacked with an aerial missile. They fled the burning building, and those that could jumped into ambulances and were taken to the nearby neighborhood of Panasala. Rohiya, meanwhile, was dead. She had died instantly, and still lay where she died, because the ambulance driver that tried to come and retrieve her body was attacked by the Israeli military as well. And before I share his story with you, I just want to show you a few pictures. This is Hiba showing us where the woman had gathered. What's most disturbing about all of this, folks, is that there was a strong sense of dissociation amongst the Palestinian population. There was a very obvious sense of trauma. Folks spoke in the third person, didn't cry at all, and I'm not saying you express your emotions in the same way, but there are indications of trauma that eventually become post-traumatic stress disorder. And many of the residents exhibited those. Hiba, whose mother had only died recently, was speaking with lots of eagerness. And one of the things that happened while we were in this house is that a fight broke out between this family that we were interviewing and the family of the girl who was shot in the leg, arguing who would tell us the story. And it was really disturbing for us because, we're coming in perhaps with this liberal framework that everybody is just suffering and mourning, but here they're fighting for a space to have voice and to speak for themselves. And that was what was most important. And that was what Hiba here was enthusiastically expressing to us. This is where Rohiya died. That house with the red door is the house where the sniper was on the second floor. Rohiya's body was here for 12 hours. And not for shortage of ambulances. The reason that the ambulance driver couldn't get to her is because he was attacked en route. This is Marwan Abu Rida and his family, also from Khuza'a. And Marwan tells me that he got the call at 8 a.m. to retrieve Rohiya's body, but when he attempted to turn the corner into that alleyway, he was shot at. And
on you, your power is used and innocent.